Good morning, dear students. We will be starting this session shortly. Good morning, everyone. I welcome you all to this webinar. We will be starting it shortly. I really could see the students are joining in. Another 2 minutes and we will be starting the session. Thank you for your patience.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone and to moderate this session. I hope that everybody is able to join in, and in case there are any challenges with audio or visuals for our participants, please just leave a message and I'm sure our team will be able to assist you. Now that we have that addressed, thank you so much for joining us. We are going to have hopefully a very interesting conversation over the next hour and a half with some distinguished personalities who have joined us today for this webinar. Our conversation today is going to focus primarily on law, technology, and the implications for young legal professionals in the coming years. So without much more of an ado, I'm going to introduce our panelists today. We have with us, firstly, Mr. Krishna Deo Singh Chauhan, who is joining us from O.P Jindal Global University. Professor Chauhan is an alumnus of NLIU Bhopal. He also holds a master's in intellectual property rights and technology law from the National University of Singapore. His area of focus is technology law and innovation. And we are very glad to have you with us today, Professor Chauhan. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Professor Rao, and it's a pleasure for me to be here as well.
Great. We also have with us today Advocate Antony Julian, who is the convener of the steering committee for the Center for Justice and Technology at VMLS. He is also a member of the Joint Implementation Committee at VMLS. Advocate Antony is someone who is quite passionate about technology and law, and especially the implication of technology vis-a-vis the legal profession, the legal ecosystem. And, I hope he will bring that today to the conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today, Antony.
Thank you, Suhasini. It's a pleasure to be here.
And great. And last but not the least, of course, is our very own Dean, Professor Padmanabhan. Professor Ananth Padmanabhan is an alumnus of National Law School, Bangalore. He subsequently did his master's and his doctoral degree from UPenn, the Carey Law School. He's also a Sloan Fellow at the moment, and he has led the way with some very interesting initiatives in technology and law in India. Earlier, he has been instrumental in launching the Daksha Fellowship, the first of its kind in India as a residential fellowship in technology law. And of course, we are very glad to have him as our dean, and also for being a part of this webinar today. Thank you so much, Dr. Padmanabhan, for joining us today.
Thank you, Suhasini. And before we forget, let me introduce you. So Ms. Suhasini Rao is probably the best person we could get to moderate this session. She's the director of Center for Justice Through Technology at Vinayaka Missions Law School. She's also an accomplished entrepreneur. She has many years of work at the intersection of law, technology, and business, and is also working currently on major themes relating to esports and gaming laws in India. She serves as an associate professor at VMLS and is also our assistant dean of administration. So thank you, Suhasini, for taking time out to moderate this session. Back to you.
My pleasure, Anand. Actually, before we even proceed, I think it would be good for our participants today to understand a little bit about our association with the O.P Jindal University as well. So, I request you to give us a little bit of context in this regard.
Absolutely. And in fact, this is such an interesting occasion to mention about this, because I just had dinner a couple of hours back with Dr. Rajkumar at, near Stanford campus where I am right now. And we both were talking about innovation and about everything that's happening in the technology sector. And something very interesting that came up in the conversation is that the traditional model of education is not going anywhere. Universities that are willing to look beyond themselves and look at the larger picture, that are willing to push the goalpost, are going to not only survive but also thrive and do much better than all the so-called disruption happening. And in that regard, I consider Jindal Global University a disruptor, a very innovative incumbent, and in this particular regard, as a player in the legal education landscape in India that is more than willing to share its learnings with other institutions like Vinayaka Missions Law School, much younger institutions. It is in this context that I would place the institutional mentorship arrangement that we have entered into with JGU. It is the first of its kind, I think, for a private university in India. It is definitely the first for JGU. And it is also a matter of honor and privilege for us at VMLS that JGU chose us as its mentee. So as part of this institutional mentorship, all the learning that JGU has acquired over a decade, more than a decade, in terms of building a top-notch institution, which is today ranked not only in India but globally as a pioneering law school, and its learnings in setting up further schools beyond the law school. All of that is something that JGU has been willing to graciously share with us, help us, build the foundations of VMLS as we go along through this institutional mentorship arrangement. More about that in the course of this conversation, but this is the broad context which I wanted to highlight right away for the benefit of all our students who are assembled today.
Thank you so much. I think that really gives us good insights into what is happening in legal education in the private sector. And on that note, before we get into our conversation today, I'd like to sort of set the context as to why we're talking about technology in primarily an educational context today. It is there. Technology has now taken over every aspect of life. There isn't a single aspect of life that does not have technology as an overriding or an overarching presence. And especially I was just talking to my mother the other day about technology and law, and we were discussing the use of typewriters and how using typewritten submissions in court was considered to be being very, very innovative, to the point where now we have entire court systems where in India we are not even talking about other more advanced technologically advanced governance systems, but in India, where our courts are now seeking submissions online and using tablets and iPads directly in while on the bench to look at submissions and documents. So that's quite an arc and quite a sort of permeation of the legal system that technology has managed to do. So what this means for young aspiring legal professionals is that they have to be comfortable not only with the use of technology, but arguably one step ahead of it. Because by the time they become active members of the profession in whatever capacity, whether as litigating lawyers, whether as corporate counsels, whether as members of the bench of the organized judicial systems of the country, technology will have far obviously outstripped what it is doing today. So they need to be thinking 1 or 2 or even 5 steps ahead, understanding it from not just a utilitarian perspective, but from a regulatory and legislative perspective. What does it mean for society as a whole? How is it impacting human interaction? How is it impacting various sectors of industry? Which also makes us pause and think about what has happened in the last 4 years post COVID. Tech adoption, especially in law, in traditionally sort of slightly more resistant sectors, has increased exponentially, and including education. More and more colleges, more and more universities are continuing with at least a hybrid learning model, if not a pro digital learning model. So there is also the angle for us to consider, and we will in today's conversation, how technology impacts education, and more importantly, how it impacts legal education. And what is the sort of basic skill set that any young student, a young graduate should be aware of, and go through this process in their educational years. And then of course we also need to finally think about, as the next generation of legal professionals, how are we going to use this phenomenal expression of human intelligence and harness it for the betterment of our collective society, right? Whether it is to use technology to solve challenges currently being faced by our governance systems, by our social systems, whether it's in our rights-based approach, a situation where we need technology to step up. These are sort of very interesting areas that we should all be thinking about and trying to solve. So, given this context, today's conversation, let me start off today's panel discussion with the first question for Professor Chauhan. Professor Chauhan, to you, we'd like to know from you, what according to you is the impact of technology on the legal profession? Would you say there are new avenues that are opening up in the legal profession for a young law graduate because there is more and more technological innovation that is happening outside of the legal space?
Yes, absolutely, Professor Rao. In fact, let me start by saying that I think the answer to this question is at one level fairly straightforward. That not only that the impact of technology on legal profession is quite extensive and it's going to be long lasting, it also opens up a fair bit of avenues for fresh styles in practice, fresh styles in thinking about law. In fact, that's what I would actually like to talk about a little, because some impacts are actually fairly visible. Even students now use technology to research. Research has become very technology enabled already, right from looking for case laws to other legislations to other material, even scholarly papers. And all of this allows for far more efficient research and practice in law. But even as we graduate from the student level to the professional level, technology is once again very visible, because as you've already very correctly mentioned, that especially in the post-pandemic world, we are seeing the adoption of technology by legal professionals, but also courts. So everything from digitization of the records to e-filing are things that have already gained us momentum. And each one of them is going to be around for a long period of time and impact the way the profession actually works. But that part is, of course, I would say, conspicuous. Everyone can see that that's happening. But I would like to also, in addition to this, point out that much of the impact also is a little latent. So let me say that there's this idea in the philosophy of technology that technology is not just a tool, but it becomes embedded in the system. So what we end up getting is not society using tools or professionals using tools, but the whole societies or the whole professions becoming a socio-technical system, right? There are many examples that can be given, really. I mean, let me give you one example outside the legal profession. Very commonly used example of Uber or other ride-hailing apps, right? So this is a clear example of how technology has embedded into the way something is done, and therefore also what leads to what is often referred to as disruption. But this is the level at which I would urge all the students going forward to think about the impact of technology upon law. That it's not just a tool for you to use, but it's also a way of life as a professional, a way of life as a student. It's embedded everywhere. And how that impacts and what we can do about it is very important. I would like to point out a few things here very quickly. One is, of course, that it goes without saying that in order to be able to harness this for our professional developments, all the students need to be very proactive in interacting with the technologies, understanding what goes behind these technologies. I don't mean to say that everyone needs to become a technological expert, but we need to understand how these technologies function. How what are the essential principles of artificial intelligence? What are the essential principles of blockchain? Why are they being used? Why they have become embedded in our systems and professions is one type of question that needs to be addressed. And secondly, and with this I will conclude this question, is this concept that I have read about that I find very fascinating, which is called design thinking in the legal profession. So in general, design thinking is about providing for the want of a better word to put it simply, tailor-made solutions to clients. But why does technology play a very important role is because technology allows us to tailor make specific client-made solutions through iterative processes. So it's not that one solution fits all sort of approach is adopted, but we use software and other modalities of technology to make the lives of clients easier, to solve their problems better, and we tailor them through a constant process of consultation with the clients, so that we are able to provide the best possible solution. I think this is the way lawyers and legal professionals going forward can make the best use of technology in the legal profession.
I think you touched upon very interesting concepts here, Professor Chauhan. We'll definitely loop back to that, and I'll probably request Professor Padmanabhan to talk a little bit about how design thinking sort of plays a big role in legal education also, which actually brings me to the second theme that we've been sort of started talking about over here, which is on the concept of legal education. Professor Padmanabhan, can I request you to talk about how technology is impacting legal education today specifically and the legal profession? Just as Professor Chauhan has touched upon how it's taken over, in fact, quite a few of our sort of social systems externally. Has there been a similar phenomena within legal profession and legal education specifically within the universe?
For sure. I just think that the rapidity with which we saw, for instance, technology taking over ride hailing or technology taking over financial payments, that rapidity may not be evident to us, but there is a lot happening which needs deeper exploration, deeper thought. And for us educators, we need to really assess what is the risk and benefit impact of technology. So to get a little deeper into this question, I'm actually going to pick one particular technology which is in everybody's mind right now, ChatGPT. Of course, ChatGPT is an application. The broader technology field is what we call generative artificial intelligence. Now, so far, our hope and belief has been that while artificial intelligence is useful for very narrow tasks, for instance, beating the Go champion and other very narrow pattern recognition oriented tasks, fraud detection for large scale credit transactions and so on, artificial general intelligence is a while away, is a distance away. For the first time, I think we are at this cusp of what Dr. Chauhan mentioned, that embedding of a socio-technical system, which is forcing a lot of us to go back to the drawing board and really ask ourselves, is artificial general intelligence or AGI actually that far away? Right? So it's a very peculiar situation that we are confronted with. And I can say, looking at ChatGPT, just the specifics of ChatGPT, there are a few key assumptions that existed maybe even like 2-3 years ago, which we are not sure any longer. I'm not saying it is irrelevant. I'm just saying we are not sure. The first is the role of writing. I mean, you suddenly have this chat app, which is taking all this data. Of course, it is not live trained. It's only the data sets are only till September 2021, which is the answer that ChatGPT will give you if you ask ChatGPT about its own timeliness. But assuming that the next version is able to kind of update that information on real-time basis, you have very grammatically correct sentences being framed by the chat app. And Suhasini, you know this. I mean, we as educators have focused so much around legal writing, right? So does that mean that legal writing becomes irrelevant? No, I don't think so. All that it means is that we need to train our students how to use solutions like ChatGPT to ideate, to perhaps break down their thinking into various themes, to conduct deeper research in a thematic or structured manner, and then put to use all the learning that they have gathered over the years in terms of efficient legal writing, right? I mean, so I'm just saying that we are entering a fairly uncertain world. I mean, that's all I can at this moment say. And what legal training would look like, especially training on aspects like writing, would look like for this world is still a matter for debate. I have, in fact, also seen here sitting at Stanford certain products which are built on ChatGPT, which are far more advanced than what we see using ChatGPT right now in front of our eyes. And it did raise a sense of wonderment first, but later alarm. Because when seeing that, the first thing that strikes me is, sure, this is great, but if a legal research note, without even training it on Indian law databases, right, can still come back with responses that look fairly sophisticated. What is the role of, a paralegal or the role of a first year law graduate in a law firm? I'm not saying that the role is rendered irrelevant. I'm only saying that it's going to change, and we have to, as legal educators, anticipate that change and sort of, help our students get ahead of the curve. Now, what then is a potential doubling down in this kind of scenario? To me, that doubling down is on good old critical thinking. Because with all of these, advancements happening in the world of technology, the ability to ask questions, the ability to analyze raw information, the ability to get something actionable out of that, that ability is still within the realm of the specialized common sense that makes all of us lawyers and professionals working with law, right? So that specialized common sense is something that we need to keep, giving to our students. And what that then means is different ways of teaching that go outside the realm of the lecture method. So that's the final point that I'd like to make, before passing the mantle back to you, which is that so far the assumption was it's all about the knowledge, right? You need to, whether it's a moot court or whether anything else that you're preparing for, it's largely about the knowledge. It's largely about unearthing information, right? Finding the law. And then suddenly you have all these solutions which probably are going to find the law much quicker than you ever would. Right? So what next, right? What else? And the else part of it is the active critical thinking part. But to give a learner the ability to do that, it's not enough any longer to follow the stage lecture method and then say, look, we will provide you all that knowledge. What is more important, in fact, is to help learners see through multiple scenarios, to learn to debate these scenarios among themselves, and to see the various policy values and, of course, descriptive legal provisions that suffuse your understanding of these scenarios. Right? I mean, to give you an example, we take the standard, contract problem, right? I mean, the doctrine of promissory estoppel. Or today, you're having a raging debate about same-sex marriages in India, right? See, about all these themes, we are no longer in a world where we say, oh, there is that case which was decided by the Moroccan, Supreme Court or something like that, right? Because that information is going to be unearthed much quicker by a bot than by a human being. So what would then happen is that the human being sort of takes in all this information and is then able to generate far deeper questions that can then inform the outcome of that particular litigation. So to do that, we as educators need to go back to the drawing board. We need to rethink the lecture method, and we need to come out with more active methods of teaching. And on that point, technology can be a great enabler, and we can, talk more about it in the course of this session.
So that's very interesting. So your perspective is to say, look, this change is inevitable. It's happening. It's not that when will it happen? It's happening. It's time for us to start embracing this change rather than, sort of being just wary of it. That's a very sort of interesting way to look at change, especially for younger people who are going through this educational journey now, or for the next couple of years when these technologies are coming in, which then sort of leads us to the thought of where does technology step into the courtroom, and where does technology impact what is actually happening in an organized judicial system or an organized justice system. And for that, I'd like to request Advocate Julian to speak a little bit about it. Antony, I'd like to hear from you, what do you think is the intersection of technology and law today in the courtroom? As in, is it really impacting, like Dr. Padmanabhan mentioned, is it really impacting how research is happening, how the groundwork is happening, or has it already jumped into the analysis part? Has it already, moved into that space? And and leading from that, as a practitioner, as somebody who's at every stage of the Indian judicial system, where do you see the comfort level of young graduates and young lawyers entering the legal system with technology and technological solutions over here?
Thank you, Suhasini. That's a great question. And also I'd like to thank my fellow panelists, because they raise a lot of points which would also answer, which would tie into the answer that I'm also giving, what I'm also discussing. For example, one very obvious impact of technology is the length of judgments. They've increased manifold because of the access to a word processor. Right? Earlier judgments, they didn't have control, copy, paste. Control V, control P was not there. So now, when the judges were writing it, they're dictating it to their stenos. They can say, okay, you extract all these paragraphs from judgment X, you put it there. So a judgment that was, would be 20 pages becomes 100 pages. So this is a fact. I mean, this is something that retired Supreme Court judges have also mentioned, discussed on a lighter way. But jokes apart, the fact is that technology had made an entry into the court system for a while. I'd say almost 3 decades now. But then the scope has definitely increased. Like early 90s, it was a very different sort of court. The way filing was done was very different. But then some courts, especially I'd say Delhi High Court, took a lot of steps, proactive steps to make sure that technology was adopted much earlier. So they had an e-filing system, I think one of the first in the country. A lot of it was because of very proactive judges on the bench, Justice Badar Durraiz Ahmed, Justice Madan Lokur. These are 2 judges who took a lot of effort. So they ensured that the High Court, they saw the future, and they ensured that the High Court took certain steps. But at the same time, lawyers are also dinosaurs in many ways. We don't like to adopt technology very fast. So to sort of give that comfort level, what they did is that you do e-filing. Along with that, you also have to, do a physical filing of the entire bundle. So it sort of became redundant after a point. So there are cases where, you could just give a blank CD with the hard copy, and they won't even check whether there's anything on the CD or not. Right? But now we've come to a stage where of course the pandemic was the great push forward, because if that hadn't happened, we probably would still be at that stage. Now we are at a stage where, including the Supreme Court, I can file an entire case from scratch with no papers at all. I can do completely paperless filing. We are at that stage at the Supreme Court. And this is the level where we have reached. And in fact, what is important to understand here is that as new lawyers and new students, as new law students come into the profession, the impact that they have to be able to adapt to technology, because the fact is that, it's a given fact that technology is here to stay. There's no getting around that fact. So unless and until you're able to adapt these important skills, because these are not only skills that will help you for your profession, these are now life skills. Because if you don't know how to send an email, there are unfortunately students. I've had some interns from colleges who may not have that privilege of access to technology. But of course, that's one of the first things you tell them, that this is a very fundamental skill that you have to develop on your own time. If the law school is not investing in you, then you have to do it on your own time. So Also, as far as the experience in other countries goes, I think India itself is a good example because the experience is very different in different states. So I've had the privilege of going to 2-3 different jurisdictions within India itself. And it largely depends on the High Court, how active the High Court and the bench is there in ensuring that the lower judiciary also adapts technology. So Delhi High Court, I think, is hands down one of the best as far as that is concerned. But other high courts, it varies. There are some which are still, even their website is very basic till now. They don't upload orders onto it. And whereas other high courts are somewhere in the middle. So I'd say it's a spectrum right now, really.
Interesting, Antony. I mean, that's I agree with you. My own experience with practice has been similarly varied across jurisdictions in India. But when you mentioned a CD, I was wondering how many of our attendees today would recall what a CD is. And that itself is a interesting arc of technology to have followed, right? Somebody mentioned the little save icon at the top of Windows OS is still a floppy disk that all of us who entered the profession all these decades ago, but it is something that now belongs to museums, and that is how fast technology is moving. You mentioned that learning and access to technology is significantly varied depending on so many other socio-cultural issues, and I'll definitely loop back to you a little bit more later on in our conversation to explore how technology is also sort of impacting that or enabling or helping bridge those gaps. But for now, I want to use the theme that you mentioned, which is the role that technology is playing in the courtrooms, and come back to Professor Chauhan to actually ask, what do you think is the impact of intelligent technologies like Ananth mentioned, right? What everyone's talking about, ChatGPT, AI powered search, basically search and collation, that to give it a very sort of easy to understand concept. What ChatGPT is publicly accessible is a search and collation algorithm, right? It is taking information that's already there and synthesizing it and putting it out there for the consumer who's asking it to do this task, which is effectively 9/10 of the job of an intern or a young associate or a young graduate. So what is the impact of such technologies on legal search, legal research, and leading from there, how do you think this is impacting data-driven decision making, especially when it comes to legislation? You mentioned examples such as Uber or entire sectors or entire industries that have been sort of overlaid with technology stepping in. So, it would be great to hear from you a little bit about that. And I can see that we already have a bunch of questions around a similar theme. So please, over to you, Professor Chauhan.
Certainly, Professor Rao. So I think let me start by focusing on this word that is key to the question that you have put before me, which is intelligent. That these technologies that we are dealing with are there. So let's say there's the largest set of technologies in general, and then there's a subset of intelligent technologies. So let's focus on this and how is this subset different from the largest set? So what I understand, and this is also captured in the technology artificial intelligence, is the ability to sort of achieve any goal which has been sort of prefixed or pre-seen, or sometimes even the goals evolve over a period of time. But if we look at the history of artificial intelligence as a technology itself, we notice that what it means, how this notion of intelligence is captured itself is not settled, not clear. But but over the past decade or so, one particular approach to intelligent technology that really captured our imagination, and which is pretty much all that people talk about, is learning. So machine learning essentially is what has now become the primary technology within which we can actually call intelligent technology. One example of which is ChatGPT. So when ChatGPT is discussed in this context, my understanding is, while it is important, in this, let's say, hype, we should not also sort of leave behind the technologies which are other machine learning based technologies, but not large language models, which is what ChatGPT is, which is based on training an algorithm on very large data sets, and basically allowing it to sort of predict what the next word would be. There are many other intelligent technologies which are the previous generation of AI, which is also sometimes referred to as discriminative AI, which is able to say what needs to be done and what doesn't need to be done, and what is the choice in a particular context. So machine learning based technologies other than ChatGPT are also going to be very, very important. With that, let me quickly talk about the two things that you have asked. First is legal research, and the second, data-driven decision making. I think both of them have at least one commonality that I would like to talk about, which is the process of training, which is absolutely critical, and which is something that actually needs to happen, at least for now, in a top-down fashion, although that has its own pros and cons. But what I mean to say is that in whichever domain we want to use these technologies, let's talk about two domains. One is, of course, the legal domain, and the other is regulatory and legislative domain. So if we talk about legislative and regulatory domain, the authorities, let's say the government, needs to ensure that we have the proper expertise to first figure out what and where these technologies can actually be put to use, right? Because part of understanding what is the utility of these technologies is to understand what is not the utility of these technologies, where they will not actually work. And in this context, I have come across this very interesting research which shows that in US, which at least for now is one of the leaders in this field, how government departments have extensively used this technology for data-driven decision making, exactly the point that you raised. So for example, the Securities and Exchange Commission has spent a lot of time, investment, as well as brought in expertise to train algorithms that are able to tell which filings could be fraudulent, which filings could be problematic, which are not, which transactions are fraudulent, which are not. The Customs Department has used artificial intelligence based technologies for creating risk scores about who to allow through their borders and who not, so on and so forth. All departments, even if the Food and Drug Administration has trained algorithms to sort of go through the filings and assess risk of which drug could be how much risky. So all of these are very important, but they depend on the governments or the relevant authorities bringing in the expertise, spending time, being patient with the training process, ensuring that the level of accuracy is very, very high. And all of this could be supplemented in bits and pieces by large language models, but large language models are not one-stop solution for all of these different applications of artificial intelligence. They have to be supplemented by other forms of machine learning based AI. And to conclude the last point, legal research, I think my initial point stands that before we can use AI for legal research, even though we have seen great advances, even ChatGPT does good work, but legal research is one of those fields in which accuracy is very, very important. It's almost critical. If the legal research throws up things that are not accurate, it's a problem, which is not the same thing with, let's you take the example of one more application of AI, recommender systems. So when we visit social media, recommender systems are all around us, trying to understand what we are doing and recommend, videos, posts, whatever to us. That is one context in which accuracy is not critical. They can make 10% times mistake 10% of times and things will be fine, right? As long as they get 90% of videos that appeal to me, they are good. But legal research is not one of those areas. We at least had to, in principle, aspire for 100% accuracy. So therefore, before we use these systems for legal research, we need to think about how the data will be brought in, how we will ensure that the data is correct, how we will ensure that the algorithms are trained properly. And with that, of course, legal research will itself form a loop of feedback with which these systems will get trained. But the researchers will always need to be very, very careful, be aware of what the pitfalls of the technology is, and be able to sort of spot when these systems make a mistake. This is where Professor Padmanabhan's point is very, very relevant about critical thinking. The point for a legal researcher right now is to be able to find mistakes in the AI's output. If we are able to do that, we are doing critical thinking. And we are also ensuring that in the long run, through our feedback, the AI systems will actually improve. So I think these things are going to be relevant.
So that's very insightful, Professor Chauhan. In fact, with your background in IPR, I was just thinking the other day. I follow the column Ex Machina, and there's so much that gets discussed in that particular conversational thread. I think one of the greatest beneficiaries in the Indian ecosystem between technology and law will probably be the patents, GI, and copyright and trademark office, right? Because the kind of search that needs to happen in terms of both accuracy, efficiency, and relevance would be a place where it applies, and it has direct and immediate legal implications of what those results are. So it would be interesting to see how that area also develops. But taking off from what you mentioned, accuracy, I'd like to come back to Ananth, you, and ask you, accuracy is one of the things that definitely needs to be kept in mind in sort of the intersection between technology and its adaptation in the legal space. But what are some other ethical concerns that such technology is throwing up, both from an educational perspective? So for instance, such technology entering classrooms, are there ethical issues that need to be borne in mind, both by students and by teachers when they are interacting or using this technology? And then opening up that sort of perspective into ethics, law, and technology as a profession outside of the classroom. It would be good to hear a little bit about that if you have some thoughts to share.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think both these subsets of your questions, Suhasini, I think the foundation has already been laid by Professor Chauhan, because the two themes that both of you mentioned, accuracy and intellectual property, these are actually raising some very key ethical concerns. So I'll begin with the non-educational setting and then go to the educational setting, because I want to dig a little further into the accuracy point. So that is a very important issue. And part of the inaccuracy when it comes to not only generative AI chat models, but other technologies, other machine learning models that Professor Chauhan had mentioned. I think the thing to keep in mind is, what is the data? I mean, there are many things to keep in mind, but the first is, what is the data set that you are using, right? And because everything fundamentally goes back to that. I mean, if you have noisy data, and noisy is a very polite way, in a way, of saying data that is using discriminatory markers, right? Data which, like for instance, studies have shown these that solutions used to aid governance, for instance, in the United States, particularly grant of bail applications, the presence of racial markers and discrimination being perpetrated, biases being perpetrated on account of the data sets that were gathered to train the algorithm, right? And that is just one example, but there are many other examples too, and there are several books, I mean, for anybody interested, that we can recommend. One that immediately comes to mind is Weapons of Math Destruction by Cathy O'Neill, which talks about the financial algorithms and the decision making, and how people are denied or provided access to credit in various different contexts, and how geographic, gender-based, and race-based factors come into play. So the first is the data set. The second is also, again, with accuracy. Many of these are black box algorithms, right? So if they are inaccurate, let's assume they are inaccurate, where is the inaccuracy, right? So that is another big ethical concern. Why is it an ethical concern? Because to solve the problem, there are multiple solutions currently being advanced, and one of which is to say, let the government or the regulator have the source code, right? But that is a deep ethical issue, because there is a sense of proprietary data and proprietary algorithms that we are working with, which, as any society that accepts free enterprise as a general premise, cannot ignore, right? So there is an ethical conundrum there, but there is also the other ethical conundrum that if you are not able to detect where this is going wrong, where this is becoming unaccountable and so on, then there is unfairness, right? And unfairness is a huge ethical red flag. So we are really in some ways between a rock and a hard place as far as accuracy goes. And when it comes to law, legal decision making, accuracy is a very important principle. I don't think any of us are in that world right now where we say for pragmatism we are willing to forego fairness. I don't think the Indian legal system at least works on that basis. As a democracy, we don't believe in that, and rightly so. So then when you try to bring in efficiency, where is it going to cause inaccuracies, and then the ethical issues relating to that, I think is a serious matter of studying algorithmic bias, studying black boxes, and studying algorithmic accountability, and creating frameworks to address that. I think the European Union has made some headway in this regard, so we could all probably benefit from learning from looking at the AI Act, and the kind of impact assessment that they expect before technologies are rolled out. Of course, detractors would say that that comes in the way of gaining more efficiency, and each of us can weigh differently on this question. But I just want to highlight the question rather than provide an answer, because we need stuff to do that. The second is the coming to the intellectual property point, and that is very important, implications both in the educational and the non-educational setting. In the non-educational setting, the big concern is, especially when it comes to image creation, right? Like image creation software, and even like text generation. You are basically mining copyrighted works, right? I mean, it can be works of art, it can be music. Now they're talking about video generation. I mean, OpenAI's next big project is Suhasini Rao goes in and says, look, I want a video of a happy couple, or I want a video of a man playing with his dog, right? And the video will get generated. Already images are getting generated, right, using Dolly and other softwares. But where is all the training happening? The training is all happening at the back end using data which belongs to some artist or some video creator, and so on. So this is going to be a big concern, and as lawyers, this is going to result in a lot of work. I mean, if you're a good intellectual property rights lawyer, I mean, I think this is the next frontier, right? Applying your mind to this, so that's an opportunity. As educators, the headache is really that. What if, for instance, Suhasini, you are teaching, I think, interpretation of statutes this semester, and you had to give a project topic on how tax laws are interpreted, right? Or how remedial or beneficial statutes need to be interpreted, construction principles. Now, what if a student goes to ChatGPT and gets the answer? Now, in a non-ChatGPT world, I mean, usually, if it is taken from a particular database, right, or a website, everybody will present the same thing. But with ChatGPT, there is a possibility that different people will still end up getting different answers and present that. And then you have the added task of finding out not only whether this is done using ChatGPT, but also, whether it is accurate or not, right? Because again, the accuracy is in question. So this is a huge concern. And I mean, I really don't have a clear answer. I mean, one of the things that I'm now seeing at Stanford is the sense of resignation, right? Where faculty are now saying, look, I will run it past ChatGPT, and only if if yours is at the same level as ChatGPT, you get a pass. If you want a high pass, you have to do 20% more than what answer I get when I run it through ChatGPT, and then you get an honors if it's 40% more. I mean, look, these are these are all, I think works in progress. There are some solutions that people are claiming we can detect, like Turnitin detects, plagiarism in a non-chat GPT context, that we could, similarly develop solutions to detect plagiarism. But these are huge ethical, concerns that in the classroom setting, we are definitely going to face, where people feel that, a chatbot can basically give you ideas and then you can present it as your own. I think the only answer is really to try and build an ethical compass that goes beyond project submissions and other such things. And let's hope that we all crack it as educators at some point.
I was nodding in agreement with you, because these are issues that most of us who are in classrooms on a daily basis are already facing.
Yeah.
But there was a slight follow-up on that, like sort of line of thinking, Ananth, that I'd like to also pose to you. Is that, do you think that such technology is sort of leveling the playing field, so to speak, especially in a jurisdiction like India, and in a profession like the legal practicing profession, okay, where we still have an overwhelming majority of one gender as opposed to both or multiple gender representation? Do you think that technology is going to be an enabler to level the playing field going forward?
That's a great question. I mean, that's a great question. I mean, I think, yeah, at one level, I mean, I'm not really very good with addressing the gender question, because I haven't studied it, I mean, only for that reason. But I think I can definitely take a crack at it from the linguistic capabilities of different learners, right? From that perspective. I mean, one question which now a lot of people are asking is, do you really need to, speak the Queen's English? Do you really need to, be absolutely adept with, English as a working language? Isn't it just meant to be a tool of communication? Now, my view on that matter, I mean, I'm as an educator, I'm very clear as a legal educator that, look, English is not just a tool of communication for lawyers. It is our working language, right? So, what ChatGPT or these kinds of solutions can perhaps do to create a level playing field, if it's used in that manner, is to help you understand rules of syntax better. It is actually the one thing that it is accurate about is the syntax, right? It may not be accurate at all about the factual stuff. I mean, it is probably hallucinating. I mean, that's the technical term. I'm not making stuff. But the one thing you can be fairly certain, because like Dr. Chauhan mentioned, the large language models result in good predictability of what the next word is going to be, and very good grammatical accuracy, right? So that's one way to maybe learn sentence construction, to learn many of these things which you may not have, the teacher may not have the time, right, in the classroom to help. I mean, we are coping with that problem, and all educators have faced this at some point in India, that there are bright students who may not come with the same degree of understanding of English as a second language as other students, right? So maybe we can use these technologies to help them do better at getting more practice, right? So if that's the way that we use it, yes, certainly it can be a leveler. About gender, I'm not so sure what are the ways in which it could happen, but I'm sure there is something that you have in mind. Maybe you can share your thoughts with us. I
Sure.
mean, we would like to
Yeah.
hear that.
Great. So, just as we were doing this project also, that you mentioned about esports and all, one thing that has come up where there is a sense of even the illusion of anonymity, where identity can be protected, gender immediately takes a backseat. Okay, if we overcome socio-economic, cultural hurdles to accessing resources, gender no longer plays a determining role in professional success. And if we can, taking off on what Professor Chauhan was mentioning, if we can come up, rethink the design of our justice systems, rethink the processes, where technology can sort of front and allow anybody to access it with greater permeability, gender and sort of other markers of ability or different ability will reduce, with their impact on such outcomes. But I'll use that as a pivot point and come back to Antony. Antony, leading from this whole impact of technology and diversity and accessibility and ethics of it primarily, our next theme to think about is what role can technology really play in the years to come, especially for society at large in accessing justice systems. It's all very great and nice and interesting and innovative for us to say, hey, we want to talk about how chat GPT is walking into our classrooms and how it's going to impact the legal profession and all. But that is still a very small subset of society as a large. Let us for a moment remind ourselves that the legal profession is considered to be one of service. Our service is to society, right? Our service is to enable access to justice, access to rights, access to resources in a welfare state. So what, according to you, is the role that technology can play in the years to come in enabling such access, especially for large swaths of our society, which are still so far removed from accessing basic resources, forget highly advanced resources such as technology or information technology or ICT, information and communication technology?
Thank you, Suhasini, for that question. And I think you're absolutely right. I think we can all agree our legal system is not at all consumer friendly, to use a more commercial term. It's not at all user friendly. And here, when you talk about users and consumers, there are two concepts here. Users, I'm talking about lawyers, and consumers, I'm talking about the larger society that you spoke about. It is not, it's not very conducive to either of them, is what I'd say, because lawyers operate in that sort of confusion that exists in the complicated web that is our legal system, right? So how can technology change this? Technology is playing a huge part, I'd say. For example, the live streaming that's going on right now. So, the very fact that we can all sit in the comfort of our homes and watch these proceedings, and it's not only just for lawyers alone, because if you go to YouTube, there are a number of YouTube channels which take clips of these arguments, they break it down, they explain it. A lot of it is even in various languages, it'll be in Hindi, Tamil, Malayalam, whatever. They'll be explaining the arguments made for lay people to understand. This is such an important service that is being done. And so that itself is a very good example of how technology enables access to justice. Because for a common man, somebody sitting, let's say in a remote part of Tamil Nadu or Kerala or in the Northeast, they can just go to YouTube and see. Otherwise they only see what is on the paper. But here they can actually see what happens inside the courtroom number 1 in the Supreme Court in Delhi. This would be inconceivable a few years back. I'd say just 2 years, maybe a year back, it would be inconceivable. So apart from this, there are a lot of other steps that are being taken. Like there's an app called the e-court services also, which allows a lot of common citizenry to access, what if they have any pending litigation, they can go look it up. Of course, these also come with their own sort of, entry bars. So for example, the app I mentioned is only in English. It's not accessible in any other language. So, and also it's assumed that you have a smartphone which can into which you can download that app. Even for example, the live streaming, right? It assumes that you have a setup where you have an access to a smartphone in which you have the YouTube app and you can see it. So as far as also to answer an earlier sort of issue that Ananth also discussed, on how technology levels the playing field. Now here I'm going to talk about how it does within the lawyer community itself. So very briefly, so how even amongst the legal profession, so depending on which jurisdiction you are, so there are always entry bars. So if you're a lawyer predominantly practicing in the High Court, for you to go and make submission to the Supreme Court is usually a bit of a challenge. So you would rather just go to a lawyer who's in the Supreme Court, engage them to argue your matter. But now with the introduction of the virtual hearing systems on Mondays and Fridays in the Supreme Court, So that is allowed an access of a lawyer sitting in Kerala or Mizoram or Gujarat, somewhere far away from Delhi, easily has access. So he knows that, okay, all I need to do is engage a local counsel just to file my case. Arguments and everything else I can handle from wherever I am. I don't have to travel to Delhi just for that. So time and money are one of the biggest expenses for litigants, the consumer. This is the biggest expense, So how technology can really help in bringing down both of these expenditures. So yeah, so technology will play a very huge role, and it is playing a very huge role. But and I'm sure it'll the mindset has changed, and I think it's just a matter of time before we have even more innovations where even the other existing entry barriers will also gradually be eroded away.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you, Antony, that I think for example, I'm seeing my own experience in the legal profession over the last 2 decades. The availability, the sheer resources being made easily available simply by technology that we take for granted today. We just can't, for most of us, right? We are so lucky and privileged. We have access to things like the internet. We have access to things like YouTube. There's just so much information that, 15, 20 years ago, when I started out as a young law graduate, we actually had to go looking and then wonder, is there a book on this? Can I read it? How recent is it? How relevant is it? Yeah. So I agree with you on that piece, that I think it's there. It is making an impact. And it'll take time, of course.
Yeah, and just to add to what I said, see, like technology right now is only providing information, though. It's not yet entered the analytical space, as Professor Chauhan also mentioned. It's not yet entered that space. So maybe when it enters that space, there'll be a whole different set of problems also. We don't know yet. So there could be inherent biases, systemic biases in that analysis also. But as far as the informational space is concerned, I think it's a very safe space, and it's something that the court should try their best to expand it as much as possible so that information reaches the grassroots level person.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, from there, I come back to you, Professor Chauhan, to ask then if we are collectively in agreement that technology is here, it is out there, it is being used for easing, if not for direct benefit, but at least for easing processes and making it a little simpler for society as a large. What are some skills and competencies that are vital for future law professionals, law graduates, especially in tech and innovation? And how can these skills be honed during education? I mean, are we saying that technology is evolving so rapidly that it's impossible to even assume what will be present when one graduates? Or is there some way to start becoming conscious, aware, increasing certain skills during this educational phase so that one has that advantage when one is graduating and technology is right there?
Yes, I think absolutely. Even I am in agreement with the larger idea here that technology is certainly here and here to stay and here to impact our works. But I mean, of course, no one can predict the future, and particularly at this point of time. But the idea that the technology will continue to spiral and change at a pace which would be impossible to keep up with. I'm partly hoping here, but partly also feel that wouldn't be the case. And particularly in the legal sector, I am hoping that in a few years' time there would be some specific applications of technology and AI which would crystallize around which most of the practice would be there. I may very well be wrong here, but let's at least hope that would be the case, because that would give the breathing space to everyone to sort of adjust to the new realities and also ensure that the breakneck pace of development doesn't actually render fundamental values that our legal system tries to protect, undermine them at least. So with that hope, let me say what students can do. I think one is fairly clear, that they have to engage with the technology. I understand that different people have different levels of comfort with the technology, but at some level, engaging with the technology has become very, very important. And it is with this engagement that actually, we sort of learn what we can do best with it. Even, for example, let's say Chat GPT. I think it's important for the students to engage with this technology, use it. I mean, there's a very, very good case to be made that using Chat GPT is not unethical per se. When you use it and then build upon it and use it to enhance and augment our work, that applies across the board, not only to students, but even to professionals. I think there's a good case to be made that very useful, applications of ChatGPT can be made, and then we can use it to not just keep the work ethical, but also enhance the overall effectiveness and efficiency. I think the discussion has brought forward the benefits of this technology already, so we can actually produce better outputs compared to what we would have been able to do that. But in addition to this skill, I think two other skills, or let me just say that there is one more skill, which is a softer skill that needs to be, kept in mind, and the students need to ensure that they always keep trying to sort of acquire this, is to maintain agency over their work. And this is the other part of using technology, where we use technology, but we use it in a way that doesn't take away our understanding of what we are doing, doesn't start atrophying our legal skills. It doesn't do what we are actually supposed to continue doing, so that we become better at it, which is part of it is, of course, critical thinking, legal reasoning, and building arguments, building cases to not just represent our clients, but in whatever other context we are putting it to use. So all of these skills are very much like muscles, and they need to be practiced or continuously in order for them to remain strong. And that is what will give us edge to us, over a period of time, when we use these skills in conjunction with the use of technology. So yeah, I think these will be important. And to address the second part of your question, which is how do we ensure that we do this at the university level? I think universities themselves have a very, very critical role to play here. I think the universities, I know that it's a double-edged sword, but that being said, I think I'm still in the favor of the idea that we should promote the use of technologies. In fact, I read about this very, very fascinating idea very recently. Let me share this, because this discussion has come a few times in today's panel discussion, that how do we defend ourselves, our education system, our assignment systems, against the onslaught of potential misuse of things like ChatGPT. So I was reading about this one university in Europe. What they have done with their students is that they have said, as a part of their assignment, that use ChatGPT to produce an answer, right? So they start with the notion that use ChatGPT to produce an answer, but that's not what you will be assessed on. You will be assessed on finding faults with what ChatGPT produces, giving it further prompts so that the response that it gives actually improves as you give more prompts. So the prompts you give is part of the assignment, and it will be the succession of prompts will be judged themselves. So what prompts you actually end up giving, and then last, of course, is to ensure that the final output that you submit, in addition to giving a detail of all the process that you went through, is fit for the purpose of whatever the assignment actually was meant to serve. So I think this is a way to go. This will prepare the students, take away perhaps some fear that might be present with some students in engaging with this technology, but also improve their skills in actually using this technology. And this, of course, works in addition to other more simpler ideas, such as providing training to the students. I think that's a very fundamental idea, that we can have trainings, programs, classes. Perhaps another idea very quickly I would like to touch upon is now I have heard floating around, is to introduce a course on legal tech as a credit course. I think this is a very worthy idea that needs to be considered. Whether or not it's made a core course is a different question, but at the very least, as an elective, it could be floated with the right expertise being brought, so that students can, as I said, become the best versions of themselves in conjunction with technology.
I think that was a very illustrative way of explaining critical thinking, because effectively, what you just shared with us as an example is exactly what I think Ananth was also alluding to previously, that for us as educators, it is to a take away the fear of technology and help students recognize it is just another tool. It's an interesting tool, it's an intelligent tool, but it is still just a tool. And it'll only be as good as the person who's wielding it, right? And that wielding is the critical thinking aspect. So, which sort of, I don't think it has changed in all the years of human civilization. The role of any educator is to teach how to think, so that our students are able to do it for the rest of their lives. If we learn how to think, it's a lifelong activity, right? So on that theme, then let me actually come back to you, Ananth, and ask you that what are some areas, maybe sectoral or groups of laws, so to speak, that students and young upcoming legal professionals should keep an eye out on and sort of focus and learn. Not to say that there is one aspect of law that is more important than the other. All of them are equally important, and we all know and appreciate that. But are there any certain concepts or certain principles or certain upcoming areas that younger people amongst us today who are in this process of a legal education should particularly focus on for the next couple of years?
Indeed, but before I come to that, Suhasini, I think, I found the last, set of responses by Professor Chauhan very, very, very insightful. And I think, as neuroscientists kind of put it, when it comes to the brain, you either use it or you lose it, right? And that is the biggest. It's a huge concern, really. But I think Dr. Chauhan also presented the alternative, right? Which is that if you use it, or rather that there are many good ways in which the technology can also help you use it, right? So it's just that the technology is also this double-edged sword, which can make you lose it. So I think it's very important that students retain that quality to maintain agency over their work, because that I don't think any teacher can really teach you, right? It is at the core of your being, right? And you should feel that, look, if I am creating a work output that I really have a sense of agency over it, and it belongs to me. And whether you're a filmmaker, whether you're a lawyer, whether you're a doctor, I think that's a very integral quality to any person who wishes to be a successful professional. Now coming to the specifics of areas where one students could potentially look at to gain success. I know that we are really largely on a very tech heavy debate or discussion today, but I would actually encourage many students to look at the conversations around sustainability and that is leading to in the world around us right now. I think both law schools and law students who gain an early understanding are going to reap good returns on their knowledge and learning, and also end up some of them at least as being policy influencers, because climate change is real. Whether people deny it or not, the truth is it is real. And not only is climate change real, but our responses are also real. Many corporations are changing the way that they look at everything, starting from the very basics of corporate law that we accepted when we learned 10 years ago, that the duty is towards the shareholder and to maximize shareholder wealth and value. I'm seeing that very fundamental assumption being changed either statutorily or through common law and other policy action as well. And I think implementing that and guiding companies, and organizations with the compliance framework around sustainability is going to be a huge source of work. And sustainability is such a broad term, because there is within that environmental sustainability, there is labor practices and sustainability, And of course, the third very big emerging field is diversity, equity, and inclusion in hiring practices. So many areas where lawyers may have to sometimes go outside the strict bounds of their comfort of the legal training and get a more holistic understanding. But I think legal training coupled with legal thinking, right? The critical thinking that we have been talking about today, I think can offer a lot of valuable perspectives and insights for organizations that are grappling with challenges in that space. The second, of course, is the technology piece. We were speaking just a while ago about the ethical implications, and ethical implications are naturally going to lead to regulatory interventions, right? Whether it's changes in your intellectual property regime or clarifications, modifications, etc. Data protection becoming an increasingly important issue. Data safety, algorithmic accountability and decision making, and regulatory frameworks to avoid bias. I think I would end with just referencing something that Mr. Rahul Marthan, founding partner of Trilegal, once mentioned. I found that very insightful. He said when he started practice in the mid-90s, corporate law was becoming like this layer cutting across various sectors, right? Whether it's your infrastructure, you're in telecom, anywhere. I mean, the basic corporate governance, corporate law, regulatory framework that was cutting across various sectors, right? And what he mentioned was that he said, look, I see technology law becoming that layer, right? Because every industry, when we started speaking about socio-technical systems, which Professor Chauhan had mentioned about Uber and other, services, and what we see across services and across sectors is that technology layer, right? And when that technology layer comes in, automatically technology law comes in, right? So every team that is advising on seemingly non-tech, issues will still need a technology law person to advise that team, of course, leaving aside the core technology industries like OTTs and other types of, industries. And so I think between these two, the sustainability piece and the technology transformation or digital transformation piece, there is going to be enough and more work being generated for lawyers, in addition to, of course, all the traditional fields. And the final point that I would make is that regulation is not just tech regulation. We are increasingly moving to more and more regulation across, right? I mean, due to various values that the society wants to favor. I mean, we saw very recently real estate regulatory authority being created, and there's a lot of work being generated there. So across the board, I think regulation is an important area where students will have an opportunity to build new lines of practice. I'm sure Antony can speak more to that about how tribunal practice is different from what we have seen traditionally and so on. But my hunch is that there is going to be work for new lawyers in these tribunals and newer areas of regulatory practice as well.
That's a very interesting point at which you brought the conversation, Ananth. In fact, I want to explore a little bit more about what kind of opportunities now lie ahead for young graduates and young lawyers, and then overlaying that question with, we've talked so much in the last hour or so about the role of technology in law and how law itself is a service to society, or rather that is how the legal profession is supposed to be at its very core. So in that context, I bring the conversation to Antony. Antony, the last sort of theme for us to explore today is to ask you, do you think there are challenges that face society as a whole today, or maybe society through the formal justice system, the judiciary, the judicial rights space, or the regulatory governance space, problems that you see technology being able to solve, or there is no answer for it yet, but lawyers, or rather young lawyers or young graduates in the next few years, can actually apply skills of of critical thinking, of understanding technology to come up with solutions? Is there scope over there, like Ananth has just touched upon?
Thanks, Suhasini. Yes, definitely there is a lot of scope. See, our judicial system is overburdened. Like it's like when you go on the highways, you see these huge lorries which are overburdened with so much of goods, and it's literally teetering on the side and trundling along slowly. That is a very perfect allegory, image of how our judicial system functions. It is not designed for the sheer volume that handles, which really is the only reason I would say for pendency, nothing else. Our judges work really hard, but unfortunately, because of the sheer volume, they can't handle it. So this itself, so there are so many systemic problems, small systemic problems, that if anybody with the critical thinking, or even they just look at these, there's so many problems to solve. So for example, tech ADR, alternate dispute resolution. Forget that is tech-enabled ADR is another point. So you have, when you include mediation or arbitration, and you have you use information communication technology to enable people from different geographical regions to communicate and then try and resolve your disputes. That itself is a very good way of doing it. I mean, there are a lot of people already doing that. But what we really have to look at in the future is, right now as it operates, when you talk about technology and the judicial system, we're just doing, the system remains the same, but we're just adding layers of technology on top. So if you're talking about hearings, then instead of us coming to the same room, there'll be two people sitting in other rooms, and then there'll still be a judge. The broad system remains the same. But then when you're really talking about embedding, this into a socio-technical system, that is where the challenge will come. That's where the scope also lies, where students, future lawyers will see, how can you change the system itself? So you are adhering to the broad principles and ensuring that there is due process, justice is there, natural principles of justice are followed. But how can you change the entire system itself? So instead of following the same procedures and having, the plaintiff starts, then defendant, issues are framed, evidence, and so on. Is there a way we can speed up the process so that, so again, I don't have a clear answer how it will be done. But then we didn't imagine how much technology has sort of, leaped and bounded in the last 10 years. So, I mean, I don't know how it will look, but then I feel that in the next 10 years, even the way our justice system operates itself will change massively. And that is where that is the real opportunity for a lot of young lawyers and our law students. So what is important for them to develop is the mindset. You cannot have a fixed mindset that whatever I learn now, it will remain constant for the next 50 years. We've reached a stage where what you learn today may become obsolete in the next month itself. So the mindset to be able to change, to adapt, is very important.
Yeah, I completely agree with you that we don't know what tomorrow looks like. Technology is adapting and evolving at that fast a pace. So perhaps the best that we can look forward to and hope is that we have resilience to get through the change, and we sort of, instead of being resistant to that change, we learn to have a mindset that embraces change. We develop a mindset that says, let's get up in the morning and see what's new today. That enthusiasm that we can bring in, and if our students sort of take that away from their time in a legal education space, I think it will be about more than half of the journey covered for them. So, any last thoughts on these conversations before we pick up some of the questions that we have received? In fact, some very interesting questions that have come back is, we've talked about the positives of technology and bringing it into the legal profession, into classrooms, but are there any setbacks? Are there any major challenges that sort of can really upset the system? Maybe maybe Professor Chauhan, you can sort of help answer this particular question that we received. There can also be setbacks because of technology. Has there been any, what are the safeguards that we can have in place to address these kind of challenges?
Certainly, Professor Rao. So I think, yeah, it's absolutely not just conceivable, but plausible that these things can happen, that there can be setbacks because of technology. I think increasingly there is one idea that is, which is let's say a must, and then there have to be other ideas have to be explored. And this idea is to have some sort of a soft regulatory approach at the very least. And when I say soft regulatory approach, there are many things that can be a component of it. Which I think I'll just name a couple here. One would be bringing all the stakeholders to a common forum. This is harder done than said, because particularly in technologies such as artificial intelligence, stakeholders are global in character. It's not enough if we just limit ourselves to one particular jurisdiction and bring all the stakeholders, let's say, within India. But if we cannot, at least in principle, we should do global. But wherever and whichever forum we can do this, we should bring all the stakeholders together so that there's a diversity of opinions and we can see the potential impacts of technologies from all potential angles. So that if there are any pitfalls that there's a blind spot around them, we should be able to see them with the help of others. And then the other is, of course, to have codes of conduct in place. Now, codes of conduct are controversial in the fact that they don't always have teeth, but to have them in place is useful, because it gives a common language with which to speak, and it also gives a common set of framework towards which to work. These are to avoid what potential pitfalls can be. And potential pitfalls, I think, have already been mentioned by my co-panelists, quite relevant ones. One, of course, was how when the Compass AI-based Compass software was used in US to sort of to predict recidivism, how much a particular accused is likely to run away or commit a crime once released on bail, and then this practice went on for a while, and then I think ProPublica did a research and found out that there was a racial discrimination which was very clearly visible. May not have been intended, but the system just picked up correlations that already existed in society, and the final result was therefore biased. This is a very clear example of how things can go wrong. And things can go wrong in this way. Things can go wrong in terms of accuracies of the system. And of course, then there's a sci-fi vision of things going wrong, which I don't necessarily subscribe to. But that being said, I think the sci-fi scenarios may sometimes come to pass in a less sci-fi way. My example to cite would, of course, be Cambridge Analytica. The idea that there could be such mass negative impacts on the society was perhaps not conceivable till the time we saw that it actually did happen, and people only realized once it had already happened. So that being said, yes, these problems do exist, and in addition to ensuring that there are, I have not touched upon what more specific tailor-made rules could be created. I think Professor Padmanabhan mentioned the AI Act, very, very relevant. But my understanding is that at the very least, in all contexts, if we have the first two things in place, a forum for bringing stakeholders together and a soft code of conduct in place, then that can be the foundation upon which more tailor-made solutions can be built.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, I'll just sort of add a little bit to that and then pick up one more question that we have received, which is, I think our legal education specifically now needs to include, and not just as an elective or an external by the by, basic concepts of privacy, consent, information symmetry, which are, sort of still considered to be either business concepts or soft conversations that are had at a postgraduate level or in very nuanced conversations. But because consent, privacy, information integrity, data security, these are very real problems and with legal impact and with legal solutions, and topics that lawyers or young graduates are going to have to grapple with an alarming and increasing frequency as they enter the profession. So yeah, things do go wrong, can go wrong with technology as with any other tool, and it's important to include that in our conversation. With which I will come to the last question and point of discussion, and I would probably bring that to you, Ananth, which is a question very frequently being asked is, what would you say are the basic skills that law students are expected to have, not only when they enter law school, but also through their journey at law school, and then as they prepare to graduate and move out? The basic skills, and I would assume basic technological skills or technologically oriented skills.
Yeah, I used to begin with reading, writing, speaking, and I mean, I'm a little bit concerned about, repeating it like a parrot with all this stuff that's happening around us. But I still would say reading, writing, speaking are very important, because eventually, look, I mean, let's place the work of a lawyer in the larger, broader context, right? I mean, you are in most situations advising a client, and one is, of course, you come in with the research skills, the analytical skills to kind of apply that research to a factual situation. But if you cannot communicate it in written and spoken format, then uh, the first two are not really going to take you that far, right? So reading, writing, speaking, I mean, these are the channels of transmission, right, which help you take your research and take your analytical mind and its output to the end user. I mean, in a very simplistic design thinking, format, I am sort of presenting it. That there is a person with a need, and you are solving that problem. And to solve that problem, you need to have these three critical skills. Uh, a fourth that I actually think is very useful in the world that we are in is some bit of digital presentation skills and building a certain identity digitally, right, for your work. Often, you tend to get lost in the quagmire of competition and people around you doing various things if you're not able to kind of create an identity or a voice for yourself. And we live in a world where that is increasingly possible with with almost zero marginal cost, right, to doing that. So learning to use tools like, I mean, or resources like LinkedIn and so on, and building an identity as you kind of start building your life as a lawyer, learning to kind of present things visually increasingly is also becoming important. And there I would stress on the need to, at least, if not create it on your own, at least know how to interpret data, right? Because there is so much of emphasis in today's world around data, and I don't think law is going to remain immune. I mean, going back to what Antony had mentioned, right? In 10 years the profession could look very different, and one aspect in which the profession could look different is that there is increasingly more data for judges to base their judgments around, not only the wordplay that is often the proxy that we put in, right? Because that is how we understand things, like the reasonable man test and so on. But data that also indicates a more scientific basis of arriving at certain decisions. And we are already seeing that in the regulatory bodies, right? I mean, whether it's price fixation or many other issues, licensing and so on, you are seeing a lot of data influencing and informing that decision. So the better trained you are with it, I think that is certainly a skill worth cultivating. And finally, of course, look, I mean, in this whole man versus machine conversation, right? And it's always good to kind of also revisit that whole idea of what is it that makes us human. And eventually, it is our ability to collaborate, it is our ability to display empathy, right? And often I feel, especially with legal education, we tend to put those things on the back burner because we value our, argumentation and our hard skills, but sometimes these soft skills are what really take you to a very different place or make you a different kind of lawyer or innovate in very different ways. So I do see some merit in building those collaborative and softer interpersonal skills while you go along this journey of also becoming a very good forensic skilled lawyer, so to say.
That's absolutely spot on, and thank you so much for articulating it. I'm going to sort of tie up the last bit over here with somebody. We get asked this question very often, and you touched upon it previously. Is it important to be fluent in English? Is it important to be comfortable with English? I will say this as a practitioner, as somebody who teaches now in whatever little space that I do teach. I think that question needs to be understood before it is asked. It is not about English specifically. It is necessary to have a very good grasp of a language to begin with, to understand the law. Because how else, unlike say for instance, physics or chemistry or biology or any other stream of body of knowledge or learning, there is no tangible external analog material that can be objectively assessed to communicate ideas from one person to the other. In law, the only way we can share information is using a language. Now, whether that language is English, whether it's Hindi, whether it's Marathi, whether it's Tamil, whether it's German, having a mastery of one's language to better understand the laws of that area, of that region, is important. Then we overlay that question with to practice in India, to profess the legal profession in India. What languages do I need to be a master of? What languages do I need to be comfortable in? And there the inevitability is of English, simply because whether we like it or not, primary governance systems are constructed and continue to be constructed and regulated in English. So that is how my own understanding has evolved over the years. But we've had some very interesting conversations today, actually. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of our panelists today for their time, for their effort, and for most importantly, such absolutely interesting thoughts that you have taken the trouble to break down and communicate with us in ways that we have found very easy to access and understand. Thank you so much once again. Before we close this session, because we've had some queries about it, I just want to communicate that this is a webinar that is being jointly conducted between Vinayaka Missions Law School and O.P Jindal Global University's Jindal Global Law School. And this is under a institutional mentorship relationship that our institutions are fostering with each other, which is one of the first in the country in the private education sector. Yeah. For any other information that our participants might want regarding the programs being offered at VMLS, please do reach out to our team. Feel free to reach us through our website, through our contacts and our email IDs. And we are more than happy to address your queries. Thank you to all the participants for joining us today and for your questions. We hope it has been an interesting experience for you. Thank you once again, all panelists. Over to our, our team, our outreach team, and Sunita for this.
Thank you, Suhasini.
Thank you, Suhasini. Thank you, Professor Chauhan. Thank you, Dean Padmanabhan.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you
you very
my
much. Thank you very much,
co-panelists.
everyone.
Thank you very much.
I think we can close the session now. Yeah. So on this note, yeah, everyone can reach out to our program advisors for more details about admissions. But good day, gentlemen, and I hope we have our conversation continue soon in a similar fora. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very
Thanks.
much.